thing that I think is really important, and you mentioned this in the beginning, is we have to change the way we understand behavior. So I think so often, and so many of us grew up with this sort of um, lens, right? This paradigm of which is like, I don't like this behavior in my child, so I'm going to use reward and punishment to squash it, right? To change it. And the problem there is that you can change a behavior at the surface, but that's just surface level change, right? They call first order change. Unless you get below the surface to what is the need,
There you go.
what is the need underneath the behavior that behavior is addressing, then you're not really going to see real change unless you look at that. And so looking at behavior differently, changing our understanding when we see a behavior, rather than a lot of times what we do is we shame the person, right? Well, this person is acting out because they're just a violent person, or this child is lying right now because they are a liar, or this child is misbehaving because they're naughty. See, that is a big problem because what we're doing is we're assigning like the not just the label, but we're basically describing the cause of the behavior as being this characteristic of the person, this character flaw. This is dispositional. This is just the way they are. And that's the definition of shame, right? And so the idea is like, okay, I made a mistake because I'm bad, right? That's shame. And that's how a lot of us think. And so it's like, we got to squash this behavior, kind of at the surface. But what we need to do is look deeper. All behavior is fulfilling a need. And so the question is, whether we like the behavior or we don't, what need is it fulfilling underneath? And if we can, and this is kind of the way I look at it, even haram behaviors, right? Somebody is, gambling, or porn addiction, or drug addiction, or any of these haram things. We need, it was like, yeah, okay, that's bad. Okay, we can say, okay, it's because that person's bad. No, right? No. We can say, okay, we want to squash the behavior. Obviously we want to, but we won't be able to unless we get underneath and look at what is the need that is being fulfilled through that behavior. What is the need that this person is fulfilling through the porn, or through the drugs, or through the alcohol, or through the gambling, or whatever behavior that is. And then you look at that need. And if you can address that need in a way that's healthy and halal, then you get real change.
Yes, absolutely. The statement of, you were talking about behaviors, especially with children, and the idea that, is it that my child's giving me a hard time, or is it that my child is having a hard time, right? That they have a need that needs to be fulfilled. Is there a way that I can help them fulfill that need that is going to serve them, serve our relationship? This is one of the core things, I think, to work on in therapy. This is what I see with my clients, and people come in, like you said, with a lot of shame, is that I love Allah. I love Allah, but I know that what I'm doing is not something that Allah loves. I keep trying to give it up. I keep trying to change it. I keep getting stuck. I'll be able to leave it for a couple months and then I come right. And so one of the ways, because shame really keeps you stuck. It really keeps you in that negative pattern, because the idea of being so harsh and self-critical and shameful on yourself, you can dislike the behavior, but to say that the problem is inherent about me, that leads to hopelessness. Because you cannot change inherently who you are, but you can change the behaviors that you don't like, right? So being able to differentiate that this behavior is not okay, but that doesn't mean that me as a person is not okay.
Exactly.
And then being able to look at that behavior through a lens of curiosity. That's where I think there's a big difference between saying like, oh, like I can't believe myself. I can't believe I did that again. What is wrong with me?
Right.
Versus, why did I do that? Building that curiosity and looking at what led me to that? What is the need was I trying to escape? Was I trying to self-soothe? Like, did I feel rejected when I saw that, the example you brought up, that I didn't get the response to that text message? And so I texted somebody who I know is going to respond to me, but I also know that that relationship is not one that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but I know that they're not going to reject me. So I'm addressing that need of wanting to feel seen. Is there another way that I can feel seen?
Exactly.
Is there a way a healthy way in terms of dunya ways? And then is there a healthy way that I can connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to feel seen in that moment too?
Exactly.
Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And the thing about shame is um, most important findings of like neuroscience is that our identity is what determines our destiny, basically, right? Or what we do, how we show up. And that is because we will always act based on our identity. And so the problem with shame is it defines it basically it defines our identity in a way that is very negative, right? So if my identity says, like, it's like, for example, you say, um I'm just, I'm a selfish person, or I am bad at math, these types of identities that we assign. And you will actually, your way of showing up in the world will always align with your identity. And that's why it's so dangerous to accept an identity that is negative, right? Because you'll always go back to that. And so the real change happens when you change the identity. It's not just about behavior. It's going back to, what's my identity? How do I see, what's my self-concept?
Yeah.
Right? It's concept. Is my self-concept that I am someone, that I am fundamentally a God-loving person, that I love Allah, I'm a good person, I'm not a bad person. And so I will then act consistent with my self-concept. But it's very, very dangerous when we have been assigned or we've accepted negative identities, because then we will always eventually we will act, congruent to our self-concept and to our identity.
We live up to the expectations that have been set for us and that we set for ourselves,
Yes.
right? And as you're talking, have you ever seen the movie Inside Out, Inside Out 2? So for anybody who hasn't seen it, it's this movie that highlights all of the different emotions that go through our system and the way that they kind of communicate with us to react to different situations. And one of the things in the movie, the second one, is her development as she is coming into her teen years of her core beliefs about herself. And how, like, different experiences and different perceptions of her experiences lead her to think, like, in the end, she thinks, I'm not good enough, right? And that's something I think that a lot of, one of those core beliefs that a lot of people struggle with. And I remember hearing a sheikh say really beautifully, mashallah, he said, I don't say that I am a sinner. I say that I am a repenter constantly on the path back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that redefining those I ams that we tell ourselves, they dictate so much of our actions because they limit what we believe we are capable of.
Yep.
And that limiting belief, I think, also really contributes to the limits that we inadvertently set on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where we think to ourselves, I am beyond forgiveness.
That's limiting Allah.
Yes. It's not about you being beyond forgiveness, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most forgiving.
Yeah.
So your limits are no longer based on just you. They are based on the limitless capacity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which can be so healing too. Right?
And I think it's interesting you bring up Inside Out, because I saw it so many times, and the scene that like actually brought me to tears, and I guess I found out other people were crying too. I was like, I'm crying in a cartoon. But it was so moving, is when she was having her panic attack. And it was like, I was thinking about what, obviously it's written by psychologists and they know what they're talking about. But what was it that led her to that panic? It was the fact that she's like, I am a good friend. And the fact that she defined herself as a good friend, which is great. But what she was also like, what she had also believed was that I am not allowed to make a mistake. That was the reason. And so it was like, because I am a good friend, I'm never, ever allowed to make a mistake or hurt someone. And the fact that she had ended up hurting one of her friends' feelings, she went into a total spiral because she's like, I can only do good things. I am only allowed to do, it's basically someone who believes I'm only allowed to be perfect.
Yeah.
That's what she thought. And so her self-concept was positive, but it was not robust. It was not comprehensive. It wasn't, see, a healthy self-concept is I am fundamentally a good person, but I'm also going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
See, if your self-concept is I can only do good, that's very fragile. And the moment you make a mistake, you collapse. And that's what was happening. She was collapsing because she made a mistake. And she's like, oh, but I am a good friend. I'm not allowed to make a mistake. And the fact that I'm making a mistake, her entire world was just collapsing. And I love how it like showed like a visual of her self-concept. And then the way that it became healthier is she's like, I'm a good friend, but I make mistakes also. And it was the integration of that that made her healthier. And, she was like, it showed her getting out of this spiral, which was like a panic attack. But I just think that's really important because so many of us grew up with this like black or white type of understanding of goodness, where a good child, a good wife, a good husband, a good mother, a good father, a good Muslim is someone who only ever does good. It's like you're either an angel, and then the moment you make a mistake, this is the problem, isn't it? The moment you make a mistake, and you will, because we know this from our aqidah that we are human, will make mistakes. But the problem is if you have a black or white type of dichotomy about goodness, about good and evil, then what happens is the moment you make a mistake, well, that must make me a devil, right? Because there's only two categories. There's goodness and there's evil. And so I'm either an angel or I'm a devil. And this is what I see again and again and again in our community, in our rhetoric, in our discourse. It's like someone made a mistake, then they are now in the evil category.
Yep.
It's
Beyond
not
redemption.
beyond redemption. And it's like we have these dichotomies. And so what we have to do to really be healthy is the ability to understand that we are neither angels nor devils, that people are human and they will Beni Adam. Beni Adam, your child is not a devil and your child is not an angel. Don't put them in these categories. You got the golden child, right, who can do no harm. And then you got the black sheep, or we're always categorizing.
Yes.
And then it's like so unhealthy because we're neither of those things. We're not devils and we're not angels. We're Beni Adam. We're the children of Adam. And so we have to be able to, resilience. Everyone talks about resilience, but the main ingredient of resilience is self-compassion. It's the ability to see yourself, take accountability, but not hate yourself, not think that you're fundamentally broken or unworthy.
There's a concept called it's a concept called cognitive dissonance, right? Where it's this idea that I have values that I believe to be prioritized, that I believe to be important, and I have actions. And when your values align with your actions, you feel comfortable, right? You feel like, okay, I'm a good person, right? Like you said. And then as soon as an action doesn't align with the value that you've established for yourself, it causes some discomfort. It causes guilt. It causes some uncomfortable emotion. That actually is a real mercy, right? If it's used correctly. If that guilt is healthy guilt, where you're able to tell yourself, I made a mistake. How can I fix it? How can I repair it? But one of the things that happens when we have this black and white thinking is I'm beyond repair.
Exactly.
And because you view yourself as beyond repair, you don't repair, you don't create the change, the growth stops, the patterns repeat, and now
you go back to your identity, right?
Exactly.
Again, it all goes back to your identity.
Yeah.
And that's learned helplessness, right? All I can ever be is what I believe myself to be. So it goes back to that identity for sure.
And when you think about how that's going to impact that intergenerational, those intergenerational patterns that we're thinking about, if you are not able to create that repair, then you end up feeling doomed to repeat those same patterns again and again.
Yes.
And so if you have a difficult situation with your child, you yell at your child and then that's it. You say, you know what? I'm a bad mother. I'm a bad father. It's just the way I am.
Yep.
None of that repair happens. So you don't get to go to your child and say, you know what? I overreacted.
Because I'm just an angry person.
I'm just an angry person.
Yeah.
And that's it. And so the next time that anger, it also changes the brain, right? Neurologically, the more you believe something leads you to act in a way that supports that belief.
Yep.
And that's what changes the neural pathways. So the next time, if you don't create that repair to say, I overreacted, next time I'm going to try and take a deep breath. I'm going to try whatever it is, right? And if you don't do that, then that pathway gets solidified. So the next time that anger is so much easier. And then it solidifies that belief again in yourself that I'm just an angry person.
Right. So it's interesting because like if you ask this question to people, how often did your parents apologize to you? Most people be like, what? Is that a thing? Do parents apologize? And I think it's actually very dangerous because when we don't model repair, there's a few things that we're teaching the child. Number one is that conflict is dangerous, right? Because it never gets repaired. So what we end up with is maybe potentially we end up with a person who's terrified of conflict, meaning non-confrontational, people pleaser. I better not, just appease, just keep the peace because you have never seen repair. You've never seen that there can be healthy conflict and then followed by repair. And so these people are literally their nervous system is it gets activated by any type of disagreement because they never saw repair. And so conflict of any sort, disagreement even, feels dangerous. It feels unsafe. So there's that. The second thing is that how are we modeling for our children of how they are going to repair? Because, every parenting expert in every book, every parenting expert will say that the most important part of healthy parenting is the repair. And not just parenting, but the most important element in a healthy relationship is repair. Because everyone has disagreements. Everyone has, bad moments. Everyone makes wrong turns, right? And it's just like, the analogy I like to use is like you're driving, right? Life is a really long road trip, okay? And if you don't have the ability to reroute, to make a legal U-turn, to take another route, to come back, when you make a wrong turn, you will not be successful in your road trip.
You'll never reach the destination.
You will never reach your destination successfully. You'll either give up and turn off the car the moment you make a wrong turn, right? I talk about this GPS, right? Where the GPS is, imagine you have a GPS and the moment you make a wrong turn, you worthless driver. What's wrong with you? You have no sense of direction. You're actually a terrible driver. That's shame. That's shame. You know what? You've made 55 wrong turns this week alone, and I think you should just park up and stop trying to drive. Imagine if that happened every time we made a wrong turn, no one would get to their destination. And so it's essential that we have the ability to reroute, that we have the ability to repair, that we model this for our children, that, you know what, I made a wrong turn. You will, we all do, but here's how you fix it. That's how we have to do it.
I think that's such a nice takeaway, by the way. If people listening just take away, find your inner GPS, right? Speak to
rerouting.
Speak to yourself like a GPS will. Speak to your children like a GPS will. To acknowledge that, one of the hadiths that I always go back to that helps, I think, with this because I think one of the things that people struggle with is how much self-compassion is too much self-compassion. Am I going to get complacent and am I not going to create positive change? And, the idea of I need to beat myself up to get better. When has that ever worked? I always ask people you think self-criticism is going to get you better? So how's that working for you so far?
I can actually disprove that using neuroscience. So basically in the brain, there are different parts of the brain. You have the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that we need engaged in order to control our behavior, in order to learn, in order to plan, in order to strategize. So all of our higher thinking happens in the prefrontal cortex. This is where learning happens. This is where change can happen. And then we have another part of our brain, which is the survival brain. And this is the fight or flight, right? And so what they found in studies is that Negative self-talk and beating yourself up triggers fight or flight in the brain, which means now the amygdala has taken over. Now, applies to when I'm screaming at my child because I'm trying to get them to learn, or I'm screaming at myself. Okay, whether someone is screaming at me or I'm screaming at someone else, or I'm screaming at myself. So either you are screaming at your child or that really critical voice, or you're doing that to yourself. It triggers the amygdala. So now your brain is in the fight or flight. Your brain is literally in its survival part. And this is the fascinating thing, is that when your amygdala is triggered, your prefrontal cortex goes offline.
Completely shut down.
So now what have we just done? The actual part of the brain that allows us to learn, that allows us to change our behavior, you've just put it offline. You actually can't be teaching your child something while they are in fight or flight. They will not be able to learn if they feel threatened. And screaming at them is going to make them feel, this is just neuroscience. It will trigger the part of the brain that's for survival, not the part of the brain that's for learning or change.